So, Jennifer, I wanted to get your take on the meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. But before we get to that, did you happen to hear Stephen Miller today?
No, I didn't.
You want to hear this? I'm going to play part of it. He went on for a while. So this is Stephen Miller, who's part of, I guess, Donald Trump's inner sanctum, if you will, talking about the meeting between Carney and Donald Trump.
I had the pleasure of getting to be at the meeting today between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. What I witnessed was like watching a grandmaster in chess perform. President Trump has opened up a completely new relationship with Canada because of his strength and because of his diplomacy. The Prime Minister of Canada talked about finally contributing their fair share to our nation's defense, or to NATO's defense. Finally contributing and meeting that minimum 2% benchmark and climbing up from there, so they're not a free rider with the United States anymore. He talked about achieving fair trade with the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada acknowledged the need to strike a fair trade deal with the United States, as President Trump has long asked for. He emphasized, the Prime Minister of Canada, his deployment of troops and guards to the Canadian border at President Trump's request to keep fentanyl out of the United States of America. It's just one concrete win after another because of President Trump's leadership on this issue. And President Trump kept emphasizing two words. We want friendship with Canada, but we also insist upon and demand fairness from Canada. And President Trump will continue to hold fast to that requirement.
Okay, Jennifer, help me out here. A lot of what we just heard in here was baked in, and it has been baked in since the beginning. That part about the border, that part about fentanyl. Yes, Mark Carney brought it up, but this is not new. So to kind of phrase these or, frame them, I guess, as wins seems a bit odd to me. You?
No, it doesn't seem odd to me because it's part of their MO. At the very beginning of his remarks, I could have thought that he was speaking about Mark Carney's performance yesterday. So I thought that was particularly masterful. I mean, it's very, very hard to put in a performance guest appearance on the Trump show, like as Zelensky found out and others have found out. And I mean, to Tom Mulcair's point about not sitting in the dunce chair, as he called it, I don't think that anybody who visits has a choice, because when you sort of saw an aerial of the room, you realize that's the only place for a guest to sit. So so he was able to, in the airtime that he got, our Prime Minister Carney, he was able to pass several very, very important messages, and I think he did a great job. Now, I mean, of course, the people surrounding Donald Trump are going to say that it was win-win-win. But you know what? Like, if they want to perceive it that way, that's great. Let them do it. It can only help us, because they're going to say, and they're going to hear what they want to say and hear anyway, right?
So beyond that, if we call it a win, I guess it depends what side you're on. I heard Neil Drapkin on this morning. So Neil's a staunch conservative. He made it seem like it was a complete disaster as well. You kind of have to accept that's how some people will look at this. I'm kind of with you on this. I think he did extremely well. And I was telling Jean Charest when we had him on before, I loved when he called Donald Trump a transformational president, because you can determine or define that word in so many different ways, good or bad.
Well, yes, exactly. I heard your discussion with former Premier Charest, and I agree. The transformational thing is a completely neutral word, but when you're dealing with an egomaniac, they're going to hear what they hear,
Absolutely. All right. So beyond that, the win yesterday, we have a meeting with premiers today. What has to happen next here?
Well, what has to happen next is that we've got to look at our internal trading problems quickly. One of the things that happened today, and I sent along an article from La Presse, and so following the meeting with Prime Minister Carney, where he informed the premiers about what happened in the meeting and whatever. Doug Ford, I'm guessing in his capacity as head of the Council of the Federations, went into a press scrum, and I had heard a little bit about what he said. So he told Mark Carney he's got to develop a better relationship with Saskatchewan and Alberta than Justin Trudeau had. Well, that's quite obvious, because there was no relationship, or a negative relationship, we'll say. But then he did something that and if I were advising Doug Ford, I would advise him to not do this ever again, that this will have to be his last sortie into Quebec politics. He actually went into a melee and told Quebec what to do. and said that Quebec, and he was encouraging that we need to pass pipelines in Quebec. And so this is like the number one story in La Presse. And, whether or not one is in favor or not in favor of pipelines, that's not the point. The point is, Doug Ford cannot be seen to be meddling, or as they say in French, jouer la belle-mère, meddling in Quebec's affairs, because it'll just backfire and it won't help. He won't get his way. He should just please cease and desist, tend to Ontario, stick to your knitting there, and François Legault will deal with the pipeline issue in Quebec. But this cannot happen again, because this can only cause problems when we need everybody to be unified.
So I'm just hearing about this now from you for the first time. A reaction already in Quebec from this?
Well, I haven't seen it. It just came out in La Presse this afternoon, so I read it, and I'm expecting there'll probably be some reaction this evening for sure.
But isn't this becoming kind of, speaking of MOs, this is Doug Ford's MO lately, right? Trying to stick his nose into a lot of different pots. Well,
that's it. And I was very, and I do admire Doug. I'm not a conservative in any way, progressive or otherwise, but I've admired some of the way that he's taken some leadership on this particular issue when he had to. But I think it's sort of maybe developed into a tendency to butt into things maybe where he doesn't have a place. And, Quebec is not threatening separation, unlike Alberta and unlike Saskatchewan is now mumbling. But, it doesn't need a lot, right? And, most Quebecers, Anglo or Franco, we're not interested in taking lessons from Ontario. So he needs to keep that in mind, and pushing buttons in Quebec is politically considerably more dangerous than even Alberta and Saskatchewan. So there you go.
So let me just shift to what's going on closer to our backyard here. I'm curious on your take. Jean-François Roberge, this idea of it's never too late to do the right thing. So he was talking about Go Habs Go, but we know this new policy that comes into effect in June 1st with respect to, French on everything being sold in stores here, and some merchants simply saying, there's no way, I can't do it. The people who supply us aren't interested in doing it because we don't represent a large enough market. Does the government back down on this?
Well, I think that they're going to have to, because they have to realize how people live in the real world. And, there are a lot of elements of Bill 96 that have gone too far, and it's not Anglos that are saying it. It's Francophone entrepreneurs in Quebec. They're up to their ears in paperasse and all this stuff, and they're unable to do what they have to do because they have to comply with the same things, and they may not even be doing all of their work in French, but that's their business. Pardon the pun, but it is. But the government's made it their business to interfere with the lives of business people in Quebec, and unfortunately for consumers. So what this actually touches, one of these things, and it was covered on CJAD last week, is musical instruments. So one of the things earlier we talked about was appliances and the need to have things stamped into the metal. But now he's talking about possibly depriving young musicians or older musicians of their musical instruments, because the companies that produce them, like you said, they're not interested in doing that. The market simply is not there for them. It's not worth it for them and their bottom line. So what's going to end up happening? Either these musicians are going to have to go outside of the province, thereby, taking away revenues from our economy, or they're going to have to make do with older equipment. It's really the consumer and the culture producer. So Aaron, if you're playing a xylophone and singing in French, does a stamp really matter on the side of the xylophone if it's in English?
No, absolutely. But it's funny because I think back to when this first became a story. We were having Jean-François Lisée on a regular basis, and I brought this up. And of course, the fallback position for people who think this should happen anyway is always, and it was with him on that day. They said the same thing about movies from Hollywood, right? They came into Quebec and the ruling was we have to translate them before you can see an English version. There has to be a French, and Hollywood said, no, we can't do it. Canada or Quebec doesn't represent a big enough market. And of course, it changed. And that's always the argument here, brought up by some people saying this can be done. It's just a matter of will.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to happen in this case. It's not this. It's hardly the same thing. I mean, it's not worth it for these manufacturers. I mean, producers of culture. I mean, they want to be able to sell and sell and sell. I mean, you translate it once and sell it, several million times, right? But to change their whole manufacturing process to be able to accommodate this, and in the cases of instruments, I mean, sadly, not as many Quebecers are going to be buying instruments as buy appliances. And if the appliance companies are already saying no, of course, the instrument companies are obviously going to say no because the market is just that much smaller. So, I think that with the CAC, oftentimes they legislate, they listen to bureaucrats, but they don't really know how people live here. I mean, they got with the program with the Go Habs Go that it's part of Quebec culture. Well, thank you very much. I didn't need Jean-François Roberge to tell me that. But, in terms of just how people live and how they want to be able to enjoy a good quality of life, whether it's a nice appliance or whether they want to play the latest version of their oboe without interference from the OQLF, I think that, they need to butt out.
I didn't know there were versions of oboes. It takes me back to my high school days. Jennifer, thank you so much.